Hello and welcome to Bill Track 50. I'm Sarah Johnson and I'm here today with Steven to talk about porn. To start us off, I'd just love to get some context around the situation, porn in general.
Pornography's been around for a long time. The very first photos taken were pornographic. Some of the very first movies made were pornographic. As soon as a new medium, a new technology emerges, one of the very first industries to capitalize on it tends to be the porn industry. And certainly the internet was no exception to that. So from the very first days of the internet, a large proportion of the content has been pornographic. And this is a problem because with previous media, it's been relatively easy to keep it out of the hands of people you don't want to see it. You can't stop kids watching stuff on the internet. It's very, very difficult to do so. And this is where this problem arose. So it is a huge industry. One of the big players is Pornhub. So Pornhub is a massive multinational corporation. In 2019, Pornhub websites had 42 billion visits in 1 year, which is 115 million visits a day. That's all over the world, but it just shows the size of the operation. That's just one company. The others, there are many other different companies as well that do the same thing. But there's increasing evidence that children are accessing this content, which I think most of us would agree is highly inappropriate. A lot of the content is extremely hardcore. There's a lot of violent pornography and so on that's out there. Kind of things you wouldn't have seen in previous generations are just out there on the internet for everyone to see. There have been studies done to try and estimate what the impact of this is on children. A 2022 study, for example, said that about 70% of teenagers had accessed porn, or at least admitted to accessing porn at some point in their lives. And about a third of those had said they'd accessed it that year. So the other question then, of course, is this actually harmful? And the jury's out on this, actually, though certain people have very, very strong views on it. The evidence isn't solid. That doesn't mean it's not harmful, of course. It just means that a lot more research needs to be done.
What is the US doing? And I read something about the Billie Eilish effect, which I think has to do with watching porn from a young age.
It is. So Billie Eilish has become a bit of a poster child for this. She did an interview on the Howard Stern show where she was extremely frank about the impact that pornography had on her. And she said that she started watching pornography at the age of 11, and that it really messed up her attitude to sort of relationships for a long time. And she'd only really just started to get to grips with how to have proper adult relationships, and that she became quite addicted. She obviously didn't have any particular solutions to offer, but one lawmaker in particular, Laurie Schleigel from Louisiana, thought that she did. So at the time, Schlegel was a relatively new member of the House of Representatives in Louisiana, but by profession, she is a sex addiction therapist. So it's something that she knew a lot about, and it catalyzed for her that this was a really important issue and something that she needed to address. So she set about producing some legislation. This legislation eventually became HB 142. She went into a partnership with Gail Dines. Now, Gail Dines is actually British, and she's quite a radical feminist sociologist. So very, very different from Schlegel, who is a conservative Louisiana Republican. But the two of them realized that despite agreeing on almost nothing, one thing they did agree on was the harmful effects of pornography on children in particular. So they joined together and were able to come at the problem from both sides. And it was hugely successful. HB 142 in 2022 passed through the Louisiana legislation. Very, very simple passage. There was only one legislator who opposed it throughout the whole thing, one Democrat legislator. Everybody else agreed. It was signed into law. So the legislation then is quite simple in a lot of ways. It basically says any website that has more than a third of its content pornographic, and it comes up with some very broad and quite vague definitions. The provider must apply a age verification system to it. One of the interesting facts about it is that the legislation provides for civil suits against pornographic providers. If you look at the UK, for example, the UK last year introduced a law, the Online Safety Act, which also included age verification elements, but a very broad bill that addressed many different aspects of online safety. But what it effectively did was give more powers to the regulator and allow the regulator to go after providers and to fine them quite eye-watering sums of money. That's not the way, obviously, that Louisiana Republicans want to go. They're not big fans of regulation. So instead, they've said, okay, we'll just set up the groundwork so that if any site that doesn't implement this age verification system, parents of children could sue them.
That's so interesting because I also remember that there isn't an actual definition of pornography. Even the Supreme Court of the US said, like, it's hard to describe, but you know it when you see it. Have other states taken up legislation like this?
Well, so yes, they have actually, and that's why this has become such a big issue. So the HB 142 became what's known as a model bill. So this one then was introduced by a variety of other different states throughout 2023, which was the big year for age verification, really. So you had Utah, Virginia, North Carolina, Montana, and Mississippi all introducing it, along with Arkansas and Texas as well. So lots and lots of different states introduced this bill and passed it, and that's the key thing.
Oh.
There were many more states that introduced it. These all became law in 2023. So quite unusual in this respect, and really shows that there is a sort of broad bipartisan concern and support for such bills. Now, whether the bill is effective or not, of course, is a very different question. Certainly, Pornhub would say it isn't. Now, you might expect them to, of course. They're a pornographic provider. This law obviously creates a lot of work and a lot of difficulty for them. But they went about this in the right way. They said, okay, Louisiana, when this became law, we're going to do it then. So they did. They introduced a age verification system. They used LA Wallet and so on, put it on their site. And what happened that first year was that their traffic fell by 80%.
Oh my gosh.
Which is, that's a big hit to their business. Now, you can look at that in two ways. You can say, okay, so 80% of people using Pornhub in Louisiana then were clearly children, and they were taught by this law, and everyone's obeying the law. And obviously, that's not really what happened there. Pornhub's data quite clearly shows that it's just a broad swathe of people stopped using their site, and it's quite easy to see why. So an age verification system then involves some kind of personal identification. It's usually using a passport or a driver's license, something like that, or one of these LA Wallet. But at the very least, you need to give your name and identity to a website. So there's always a risk then that your data will be exposed, that there'll be a data leak. They happen all the time. Theoretically, you could have your identity linked to your porn viewing habits. Now, even though Pornhub went to great pains to make sure that wouldn't happen, and they were absolutely adamant that there's no link in that way and that no one's identified and nothing's stored, people are still concerned. And so people will stop using it. Now, what will they then do? The 80% of people who stopped using Pornhub, they didn't just stop necessarily going to porn websites entirely, they just went to different sites. They went to sites that hadn't bothered to introduce the age verification. And these sites are probably less reputable than Pornhub. Perhaps they have even worse content on, or they're full of computer viruses and all nasties that you can get from going to dodgy websites. These laws have also been deemed unconstitutional by some. Now, in particular, the Free Speech Coalition has sued several of these states. They sued Louisiana and Utah. Now, the Free Speech Coalition is an organization that represents the interests of the adult industry. Texas is a really interesting case. So Texas passed one of these laws, and it's the only place where it's actually been thrown out so far. And the law was, it was turned down by a federal court who deemed it unconstitutional, saying that it violated free speech. Interesting, they said that the law was far too broad and far too vague, and therefore violated sort of the free speech of people who wanted to go to these sites. But there was also another wrinkle where Texas had required pornographic providers to put health warnings on their site, saying things along the lines of, pornography causes mental illness, and pornography leads to child abuse, and all these kind of things. So the judge obviously said, well, that's wildly unconstitutional in that what you're doing is you're forcing somebody to make statements that they don't agree with. It's like the way it's not stopping people saying what they do want to say, it's actually forcing them to say something that they don't want to say. Now, Pornhub, of course, said, well, fine, you want to introduce these laws, we're not going to spend huge amounts of time and money instituting these age verification systems in states if everyone's just going to leave us in droves, because it's completely unworkable. So what they've actually done is switched off their service in all of these states. There's now 6 states across the US where you cannot access Pornhub. And if
Oh.
you do try and access Pornhub when you're in those states, what you get is a rather amusing video of this lady explaining to you exactly why you're not allowed to see Pornhub in that particular state, but
Oh.
also setting out the Pornhub solution to the problem. So Pornhub isn't opposed to age verification in itself. They just say it needs to be a system that's workable and that actually won't destroy the industry, drive people into the dark web, or just violate people's rights. So that they posit a technological solution where computers and devices would have have hardware built into them that would
Okay.
verify your age. So when you get a new phone, you put in your age, or your parents would put in your age, and your device and your computer would then know how old you are. And then whenever you try to visit a website using that particular device, the website and the device will talk to each other and work out whether you're over 18 or not. The beauty of that system, of course, is that there's no personal information being exchanged
Yeah.
there. The only personal information is that whether you're over 18 or under 18. Obviously, there are huge technological obstacles to that. And all sorts of issues about how can you make sure the adult
Yeah.
is using the phone or the computer, that people are putting the right age in, how does your phone have to look at you and work out whether you are actually 18 or not, which, is entirely possible. Your facial recognition could tell whether you're 18 or not.
I hope my phone would think I'm 18. I don't know.
No, well, you might consider it, yes, you might consider it actually flattering. You're not old enough.
What do we think the future is going to look like for this? It seems like it's
Nine
kind of
states.
taking on.
It really is. So 9 states have so far introduced
Oh,
this
wow.
model.
Okay.
9 other states as well. Now, there's no guarantee that these will all become law, of course. They're all at fairly early stages, but it just shows that this bill is spreading. If the past success is anything to go by, then you could see a lot more states introducing age verification, a lot more states then being banned by Pornhub in sort of the months and the years to come. And that's not all. There's about another 40 or 50 bills that have been introduced that do something around this, slightly different, but some kind of restriction on pornographic viewing and ways to try and get kids off porn. So it's definitely not going away, and it's just growing, and it's becoming more of a problem. And I think eventually the industry itself will be forced to really grapple with these technological solutions.
This was so interesting, and it makes me think of other blogs that we've been writing about this year, especially as it relates to deepfakes and AI. And, I wonder how we'll see legislation in the future. I know that, like, some videos came out with Taylor Swift with deepfakes and pornography, and, she's obviously very upset about it. I know we have a new video coming up soon about deepfakes and elections. So stay tuned to hear
Sounds
more about that.
fascinating. I look forward to it.